And that's what I love is the going to the beach every day. I mean, granted, I love playing in tournaments. I love the competitive environment of it all. But honestly, I almost love practice more because it's like where you really see and get to experiment and be creative and try new things and make mistakes and learn to be okay with it. So I think for me, it's kind of like that daily grind of being that inspired athlete to continue to push yourself day in and day out, and show up, keep showing up.
And I like to ask all guests of the show is this concept and this idea of inspired living. What does that mean to you? Hello and welcome to another episode of Within the Game. Let's go. My name is Aaron Wexler and I'm so excited for today's episode. So Within the Game is all about inspiration, right? It's this exploration of inspiration and motivation. And I appreciate everyone for watching and listening. A great way to support the show is to grab a copy of my book, The Inspired Athlete, as well as do the like and the subscribe stuff. All that stuff really does help out. I want to make this show a little bit more interactive. So if you want to reach out to me with any questions or comments, please feel free to do so on Instagram at Within the Game Podcast. And please follow and support my guests. And today's guest, long time coming, is the one and only Geena Urango. Geena, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Geena is the first ever athlete to receive a full ride scholarship for NCAA beach volleyball at USC after playing on the indoor team there. And she's a three-time state champion in high school, an AVP champion, and the co-host of the Bet on Her podcast. Her IG is at Urango. And Geena, I'm really inspired by your journey. And, you know, the first question I like to ask all guests of the show is this concept and this idea of inspired living. What does that mean to you?
Inspired living, I think it's for me, I feel like I was always kind of I was never the most athletic, right? Like I've always had to work very hard to get to where I'm at. Even in school, like I sure I was in, the honors classes, but I was not a lot of those people in those classes they didn't have to study, whereas I had to really put in that extra effort. And for me, inspired living is just living my life with the work ethic that I have, with the intention that I have, with the goals in mind. And I feel like I've always been very driven and always had these goals in mind, whether it came to school or volleyball or extracurricular. And so, yeah, I just think living with intent and with this strong work ethic for me is what that means to me.
Yes. Yes, I love that so much. Thank you for that. Can you carry that over to the inspired athlete? Because for me, that's the energy that I always wanted to have as an athlete, and I still strive to have that. And when I watch you play and just follow your career, you seem to have that. Could you describe what that is, the inspired athlete energy?
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, I'm going to be 35 this summer, so I've been playing for a long time. And at this point in my career, I don't feel like I'm going to make huge strides, right? But what I love is the daily grind for me, day in and day out, and seeing how much better I can get, even if it's just that little bit, even if it's just tweaking my passing ever so slightly to increase the percentages, or just little things that I think that can make the difference in a point here or point there when it comes down to the end of a set or a match. So yeah, I think the inspired athlete is making an effort with that daily grind. And that's what I love is the going to the beach every day. I mean, granted, I love playing in tournaments. I love the competitive environment of it all, but honestly, I almost love practice more because it's like where you really see and get to experiment and be creative and try new things and make mistakes and learn to be okay with it. So I think for me, it's kind of like that daily grind of being that inspired athlete to continue to push yourself day in and day out, and show up, keep showing up.
Yeah, that's so well said. I love that. You know, I want to make this really relatable. And part of the reason why I'm bringing up these questions about inspiration is like, there's so many days, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, that I didn't feel like that.
Mhm.
I felt uninspired. I felt lethargic. I felt like I'm just over it. And I feel like that's pretty relatable to a lot of athletes. Like the idea of like staying inspired like all the time is like, I don't know if that's quite realistic. So what would you say to someone who's not the like doesn't feel like the inspired athlete, or like when here's what you're saying about the daily grind, and it's like, oh, I'm tired. Like how do
Yeah.
you get, yeah, what would you say to that?
I'd say just continue to be patient with yourself
Mm,
because everyone goes through it, even, myself. And there's days where I feel like today I had practice this morning and it was a terrible practice. And I was like, what am I doing? All the mental games that I'm playing with myself. So I think it's just being patient with yourself and having compassion with yourself is really important. And to know, like, yes, there's going to be ebbs and flow in your motivation, in your drive to whatever it is you're striving to do or to become. Um, and if you feel like you're losing sight of it, I would say continue to write yourself goals. Uh, having one major overarching goal, I think, is great, but to have little goals amongst that, to for little strides that you can see. And so yeah, so I just think it's okay and it's normal and we all go through it. And like I throughout my whole career too, like there's been so many peaks, valleys, plateaus of my success. And there's been times where I'm like, why am I still playing? And then there's times where I'm like, this is amazing. So,
mhm.
but yes, if you're kind of like that, if you're not a professional athlete per se, but you still are trying to find that motivation, I think setting little goals for yourself is always a good reminder.
Love that. Micro goals. Yeah,
Yes.
no, that's huge. I want to ask you about your tenacity and your resilience, because if I'm not mistaken, you made 7 AVP finals before you won one. Is that correct?
Yeah. It was my seventh one that
Oh, it was
I
your seventh.
won.
So you made
Yeah.
6 so your seventh. So let's talk about those 6,
Yeah.
and we'll get to the winning. But
Yeah.
like you're in the, and for people listening or watching, first of all, playing in an AVP is difficult and challenging. Getting to the finals is really hard.
Yeah.
I can't speak for it because I've never been there, but I just imagine it being really hard. And you get to the finals 6 times, and you come up short. I want you to talk about the tenacity to keep going, because that sounds difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say my first couple finals, it was within I think it was around my second-ish year that I had been competing on the AVP. And so those were very new and exciting, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I'm here with some of the top athletes. I'm the underdog here. Like there's no pressure, right? And then as my career went on, and I would make another final here one year, another final the next year, and that's when I started to beat myself down a little bit,
Mm,
right? So it's like, okay, I'm proving that I deserve to be here, but yet I can't finish when it comes down to the line. And it definitely it was tough, and I've been working with a sports psych to kind of help get past that mental barrier. And so I'd say like right before COVID was when my career kind of took a big dip. So it was like I had had those finals, those few in the beginning of my first half of my career, and then I had a pretty crappy season. And that's when I was like, okay, this is, I don't know. It's just like I was putting so much pressure on myself. And I feel like I've struggled always with kind of being so outcome focused versus process oriented. So granted, then COVID happened. It was like had to take somewhat of a mental break, physical break, all of the above. And and I don't know, it was just kind of like with COVID, it was we were all just waiting for that to happen again. And it was almost like that break forced us to kind of it gave me this new fresh sense of um excitement to want to get back out there and prove myself again. And so it was funny because I was playing with Julia Scholes. This was in 2022, and that was the best season I had. And this was, after COVID, took a dip, had those finals where I was, mentally frustrated, felt like I couldn't finish. And then Julia and I made the finals, her first final, and it was in Fort Lauderdale. And we ended up losing in three. And it's funny because I put like pre-COVID was like the first half of my career and post-COVID is the second half of my career. And I felt like this sense of maturity as an athlete where yes, of course I wanted to win but I hadn't been in a final in a few years. So it was kind of a fresh feeling again. So here I'm in Fort Lauderdale. We lose in the finals in three. And I have this sense of like, it's okay. Like this is not the end of the world. And I think a lot of these younger athletes deal with this pressure of like needing to perform and this, like I said, this outcome focus. And so it's an end all, right? And also I think when you're fresh out of college too, there's not a lot of, you're trying to learn more about yourself. Like what other values do you have? What other, things do you want to be involved in? And I feel like the struggle is as a young athlete is like volleyball is everything in your life, right? For me, at least it was. And for a lot of these younger athletes, I see that. And so I think when I was able to step outside of myself and pursue other passions, it gave me, I don't know, it just gave me a better perspective that there's a lot more to life. And so sure, yeah, of course, I was bummed out that I didn't win the finals, but I was like, it's not the end of the world, right? Like we had a great tournament. The team we played in the finals had an amazing match, and at the end of the day, it's okay. So that was what kind of shifted for me mentally a little bit. And what was funny was the very next weekend, we were in Atlanta, and that was the tournament we won. And I remember going into the finals. I'm like getting chills talking about it right now. I'm going into the finals in Atlanta, and granted, like it was fresh in my mind from the weekend before what it felt like to be there, and I had that calm sense of confidence, but also assurance that like regardless of what happens, like it's going to be okay. And all you can do is just go try to ball out and then let the play speak for itself. So, and then we won. And the
I
monkey
love
was off
that.
the back.
I love that so much. And I'm just inspired by that because so many athletes, including myself, after losses, it's just crushing,
Hmm.
and to the fact that you just stayed tenacious and resilient and even that idea, it's okay.
Hmm.
Like it's so simple, but so profound. And it almost kind of like creates healthy detachment from it, right? And like letting go. Did you experience that? Like, I'm just gonna let go and do my thing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely felt that. I also felt that throughout most of the tournament in Atlanta, I was in a pretty good flow state. Like looking back, you see when you're in it, you're like, you don't realize you're in it, and then you're out of it, you're like, whoa, I just was in flow state. And it was more or less kind of that whole tournament. I wasn't thinking much. I was just playing. And granted, it was very hot. So I was just trying to like conserve energy and stay calm and cool and collected. Uh, but yeah, I think it was, and it's tough. You can't just force flow state. It was just one of those experiences where everything was just clicking. And yeah, I think the confidence thing has been another challenge for me that I wish I could always get to that mindset, but I'm working on it continuously.
Well, no, that's a great segue to this section of mindset because I want to ask you about that. Um, I want to ask you about winning mindset and champion mindset. Is there a difference? Is it the same thing? How do you create that?
Yeah. I mean, just hearing you say it off the bat, like winning mindset is obviously outcome focused, like I just said. And I feel like there is a good way of looking at it that way, but I also think that champion mindset is is a little different, and I almost like that better
Yeah,
because it's more of a characteristic, right? Like I am a champion and
yeah.
like believing that in myself regardless of outcome, right? Winning or losing. Um so yeah, so I think just, and it's so funny because I've been taught this since I was 11 and or 12 years old. I was
Hmm.
very fortunate. One of my best friends on my club volleyball team, her dad was kind of like a mindfulness, visualization, motivational speaker coach type of um, mentor, person. And so he's, ever since I was 11, 12 years old, I was doing visualization and stuff like that. I know it was so awesome. I was so
Awesome.
fortunate. And like, so I've always tried to make that a very, and his whole thing, his business was called Champions Quest. And so that was what we had, like he had an acronym. It was like um C is challenge yourself, H humble yourself in your victory, A, like I can memorize all the letters still and recite them. So I've been instilled that from a young age, and I think the champion mindset has a little bit of better connotation to it.
So huge. That's awesome. And let's get into that mindfulness training. I had a section on that, but let's talk about that now because it's becoming more popular. right? People are realizing more and more what that is. So here's what I want to ask you. So the mindfulness training. So for me, what that means is meditation, breath work, visualization, even just being grateful. Like I know that's kind of a funny thing to say, but like that's training. Like just walking around and being and living in gratitude is mindfulness training. Can you carry that further and just talk about the benefits of it, how you practice it, and how it's manifested for
Yeah,
you?
I mean, that's a huge philosophy of my sports psych, and I've been doing it for a handful of years now, or being intentional with it.
Hmm.
And that's one thing that when I feel like I'm playing outside of myself or getting frustrated, um, my sports psychologist always reminds me, like, have a thought of gratitude, right?
Yeah.
Because that definitely, it calms you. It may bring a smile to your face. Um, Another thing that I really think about with mindfulness when I'm on the court, at least, is using my sensations. So whether it's digging my toes in the sand and feeling the sensation of the sand, or looking out to the ocean if we're at the beach, or just listening to sounds around me, or whatever it may be, I just try to take my mind off of what maybe is going on the court, and then use my senses in that way. But yes, I do, with breath work, with meditation, always, like, the breath is a huge thing for me. So you don't really, yeah, you just took a breath right now. It's like you don't realize how much a deep breath actually grounds you and gets you back to the present moment. So definitely present moment, thoughts come and go. That's another thing that I always have to remind myself, is to not judge them, or to not be hard on yourself for having certain thoughts, and just acknowledge them, that okay, that they're coming, they're going. Or even reframing it for me too. So let's say I get aced and I shank a pass, then I'm like, okay, just, it was a great serve, or move my feet, or just changing the reframe versus being like, oh gosh, I just made another error type thing. Or
Yeah.
the thing is like, your brain is a muscle, and you need
Hmm.
to train it just like every other muscle in your body. And so the more that you're reframing, or the more that you're getting to these cues that help you get back to the present moment, the easier it's going to be for your brain to do that subconsciously. So
Yeah. Hey everyone, thanks so much for being a fan of the show. I really appreciate your support. And if you'd like to further support the podcast, please grab a copy of my book, The Inspired Athlete. The Inspired Athlete is all about my personal growth journey, my athletic journey, my spiritual journey, all combined into one. And really the idea is that the energy of the inspired athlete is within us all, and it's up to us to evoke that. And whether you consider yourself an athlete or a competitor or not, it's my belief that the energy of the inspired athlete is within us. Even if you just decide to take a deep breath and just move your body, that's the inspired athlete. So it would mean a lot if you could help support the book project as well as the podcast by grabbing a copy. Links to the Amazon paperback version as well as the Audible audiobook version are listed below in the description. Thank you very much for your support. Stay inspired, y'all.
yeah.
So huge. And going back to champion mindset, I think champions, even champions of life, not even just sport, but like people that are really taking that concept of inspired living and going for it, right? Like people that go for it, like yourself, have this great relationship with the present moment, because that is the gift, right? The gift is the now, the here and now. And I love what you said about grounding. Could you go into that just a little bit more, especially for the younger audience? They're like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think it's me, for me, quite literally, it's the present moment. Like, I'm grounded here in this moment, because you can't worry about what's going to happen in the future, and you can't stress about what just happened in the past. And so grounding, I think, is just really being intentional with what you can do in this present moment, or what thoughts you can have in this present moment. So I think, quite simply, I think for me, it's just literally being as present as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, carry that into flow state, because flow state for me, I've kind of tapped into that every once in a while as an athlete, but it's this really cool place to be. It's like kind of feels effortless. You're
Mhm.
not thinking too much. You're just allowing things to happen. Talk about your experience because you mentioned it a little bit. Talk a little bit more about that, the flow state. And then I want to know, is it something you can practice or does it just happen?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a handful of experiences in my career where I can think back to being in flow state. And I think maybe some people think it might be few and far between, like, oh, it's not it's only attainable randomly. But I think that, and my sports psych, and he uses this philosophy. It's called finding your fives. And so on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 is being like overly engaged, too stressed, and too like wanting it too badly. And a 0 is you could care less, right? So your fives, it could be anywhere from like 4 to 6 range, right? Whatever you want to deem yourself as. Is if you're playing your best when you're a little bit more engaged, it might be a 6. If you're playing your best when you're a little bit more calm, it might be a 4. So like for your fives, it's thinking about what self-talk you have, what actions you're doing, anything psychological, all of that allows you, that you feel like when you're playing your best. That doesn't necessarily mean flow state, but things that you can actually control and think of and do. And the idea is, if you continue to use those cues, whether it's keywords or actions, that you can start to ebb in and out of flow state. And it's something that I've been like working on at practice. And then obviously, hopefully that translates on the court in matches. But I think there's like this idea of finding out what it is. Like let me give you some examples for myself. So for
Yeah.
me, it's like always taking a deep breath when I have a moment to think. It's, feeling the sensation of the sand between my toes. It's I notice when I'm playing better, my face is not like, I don't have a furrowed brow. I'm like kind of relaxed in my face and calm. Um, and then another thing is like having the idea of like, the animal that I like to be a persona of is like the cheetah, right? Like it's beautiful, it's stealth, but like it can go super fast at the last second. So I have this like confidence, this confident cheetah in my mind too. So, and then obviously and then always like thoughts of gratitude, like, wow, I get to play here. Wow, my parents are in the stands, something like that. So those are just a few of mine. And I continuously try to remind myself of them. And I feel like it helps me get into, not necessarily always flow state, but like right on the cusp. And then the idea is like, hopefully it can get you there more often the more that
Yeah.
you work on it.
Absolutely love that, Gina. That's great. Could you talk about flow state outside of sport? Is that possible to get into? Could you get into flow state while you're podcasting or while you're surfing, or well, surfing's a sport, but like anything else, you know?
Yeah, yeah. For me, I think about like when I'm just hanging in the backyard with my dog or
Right.
something, or uh being with my parents. Like I think technology is a thing that really doesn't allow us to be in flow state in our daily lives, because it's a constant stressor, that or dopamine, whatever, that doesn't allow us to be super present with our surrounding. I think being out in nature is really important. So even if it's taking a mental break to go take a hike somewhere or go camping for the weekend, I think that's always a great way to reconnect to a flow state outside of sport. Um,
Cool.
then
Yeah.
I mean, there's obviously times when I'm working and I'm just like having to write something and just flowing too. So yeah, I definitely think that there's plenty of other areas of life that it correlates to.
I love to hear that because a lot of champions say no, you can't practice it. It just happens when it happens. Like I was talking to Karch, and he was saying no, I've maybe been in there 3 times.
Really? Art?
Yeah, Karch, yeah,
Wow.
and I actually let's come back to that because I want to talk to you a little bit more about this visualization and emotional intelligence. But I want to come back to adjusting, right? Because that's what he was saying. It's like all about adjusting, right? It's not so much about being in flow state. It's like adjusting to the opponent, which
Yeah.
I do agree with that. But let's stay on this mindfulness training because I do like this. Can you talk a little bit about visualization, right?
Yeah.
Because especially again going for the younger audience, like it's a nice concept to like visualize what you want, but how do we actually visualize?
Yeah. Yeah. I I think a visualization is a very powerful tool. I think it's underutilized for sure. And I think visualization is more than just like obviously you want to think about, okay, this is what my pass is going to look like. This is a play that may happen. But for me, visualization is actually thinking about the sensation of
Right.
what it feels like,
Yep.
right? It's even at practice. If you have a really good pass, I'm like, oh, I want to remember what that felt like so that I can reiterate that in my mind and then recreate it on the court. So it's yes, it's thinking of plays, exact plays that may happen, but it's also thinking of the sensation, thinking of like the wind blowing in your face, um, having the ball off your, if you're serving, having the ball lift off your hand. So I think there's like and that, I think you can be as slow with it as you want. I think you can, be creative with it. I have actually a pretty cool story about visualization.
Yeah.
So this was in I think it was like 2018, and it was the night before Hermosa semifinals. So my partner at the time, Angela Benson, and I, or she's Angela White now, we were in the semis the next morning, and we were playing Caitlin Ledoux and Maria Salgado. And so the night before, I'm like, okay, I'm going to do some visualization as I'm going to sleep. And I go through some different plays, some different skills. And then finally, I'm like, okay, it's 14-13 in the third set, and I'm going back to serve, and I'm standing in the middle, and I jump serve middle middle, and it goes straight down. Neither one of them go for it. They both look at it, and it hits the buckle of the back line on its way out. And that's exactly what happened. It was 14-13 in the third, and that's how we won the match to go to the finals. It was
Wow.
like, and it happened, and Benny was celebrating, and I was just like, wait, did I just manifest that? That was wild. So it was, yeah, that was my coolest visualization experience.
Thank you to new sponsor of the show, Stretch Life, located in Manhattan Beach, California. Stretch Life offers assisted stretching for anyone who wants to enhance their flexibility practice. And if you're like me, muscle tightness is something I deal with on a daily basis, whether I'm in the gym training or out on the beach playing beach volleyball or even sitting here doing this podcast. It's a challenge to make time for the daily stretch routine. And so I've been working with Amir over the last couple months over at Stretch Life, and I can tell a big difference in the way I feel. I have more range of motion, I have more energy, more muscle control, and just overall less pain. Stretch Life is offering Within the Game listeners 50% off your first session. Just mention Within the Game when you book online or when you call in for the discount. And also, if you do not have access to the Stretch Life studio, but you still want to learn more about how to enhance your flexibility practice, Amir is offering a free 20-minute phone call where he can share specific stretches and other specific tools that can help you. So visit stretchlife.com, that's stretchlife spelled with a Y, to book your first session, and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. That's so cool, Geena. Can you talk about the EQ and what that is emotional intelligence, like as it relates to that visualization? Because you just mentioned it. You have to like get into the feels of the visuals, right?
Yeah, with emotional intelligence, I don't, I mean, I think about it as like it's not just about the feels too. It's about what's going through your mind in
Right.
those moments. What's the self-talk you're having? What's what are those cues that you're reminding yourself of to stay focused or to not think too much? So um and I also think like in relation to beach volleyball, it's a matter of being a supportive partner too. So what's is my partner struggling? What does she need in this moment? How can I bring out the best in her? So I think for me, for my emotional intelligence, I really like to take the focus off myself and say, like, how can I bring out the best in my partner? And what does that look like? So, I think that's like, that's what makes a great coach too. So I think there's a lot of aspects to emotional intelligence that are not tapped into.
Yeah, no, I love that, and that's why I'm so interested in it. And are you a basketball fan by any chance? Do you watch the NBA?
Mm, occasionally.
Occasionally. Okay, so I was watching the Western Conference Finals last night. I was watching Luca, and Luca was playing with anger. Like like he was like talking a lot and just, but my point is, do you ever play with anger? Do you ever play with different emotions like
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it helps a lot of athletes when you play with it. Maybe you don't stay in anger, but you like allow, and it could also be aggressiveness, whatever the
Right.
emotion is, but do you play with that?
Yeah. I've played with it a little bit. For me, I tend to like to want to conserve energy. So
Hmm.
that's like even if it's like I don't like to celebrate too much.
Right.
I just take a breath, go back and serve. Like I'll celebrate if my partner did something really well, but as far as like anger, I don't feel like that helps me too much. There's other people that it definitely helps. For me, I focus on solely my this calm confidence that I want to portray. But I will say that there have been probably two times where I did play angry and we won, but it was because I got six packed in the face both times. And so I just remember it was like we were down in the third when one of the matches we were down in the third set and I just got crushed. Like glasses, yard sale, bleeding, had to call medical, bandaged up, and I come out and I was like, we're not losing this. And then the anger, those were like, and I'm not typically an angry person, but like that stuff, I'm like, oh my God, I'm not losing this match now. So only a couple times I would say it helped me.
Yeah, well, I feel like some of the most self-aware athletes, and even just people, not athletes, but um, having that self-awareness, knowing when to play with those emotions at the right time, I think is really valuable. And I think that falls into the emotional intelligence, and it sparks this question for me that I'm going to have for you right now, which is this idea of ego versus true self, and how
Mhm.
do you play with both? Because I feel like in sport we do need ego, right? Our ego is like, I'm gonna win, I got this, let's go, watch me hit this ball. True self is maybe, all this mindfulness stuff that we just talked about, who I really am, the bigger picture. I get to play this sport. Thank you so much.
Right.
How do you find the balance of ego and true self?
Yeah. I could probably use a little more ego, to be honest. And I think I definitely have a good amount of true self. Um, and the ego part for me is definitely like it's a struggle. And it's funny, but even outside of athletics, my whole entire life, I've typically been this very shy, introverted, not very confident person. And so it's hard for me to kind of like walk on the court and like strut. I mean, I see some of these athletes do it,
Right,
I'm like,
right.
you can literally see the ego spewing out of them, the
Yep.
way their shoulders are back and they're just strutting. And I'm like, maybe I should just like fake it till you make it type of thing. But I think it is important and it's a, but staying humble too I think is really important with that. And I think with egoness, you don't want it to get too big
Right.
to where you're not open-minded. Like I've encountered athletes where they couldn't take criticism, not criticism, they couldn't take construct like instruction or feedback because it was a blow to their ego. And
Mhm.
that's where I'm like, okay, you need to be a little bit more open-minded to seeing maybe what your partner may see or um, even if like all we're trying to do is just help you, because I mean, that's all I try to do as a partner in general. So I think there's definitely needs to be a good balance of it, but I don't think either one of them should be too big to where
Right.
you're playing outside of yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having a grasp on both of them
Mhm.
just adds to your toolkit, right? If you need
Yeah,
a little more ego in a certain, maybe a play, you like, man, I gotta show my opponent like who I am. And then,
right,
so yeah, I do think there's a balance there. I think it's up to each and every one of us to figure out that balance. But having the awareness that, yeah, I have my ego, I have my true self, that's part of my toolkit,
for
you
sure.
know?
Hmm.
I want to get into sleep because I've heard you on another podcast talk about this,
Yeah,
and it's one of those things where you're like, yeah, 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 I got to get good sleep. But when I heard you talk about it, I was like, man, like there's a lot of science to it, and it's actually really, really important, right? It's one of those things I think we all take for granted. So could you just talk a little bit about sleep and the importance of it for you and how you've been able to quote unquote master it?
Trying to, yes.
Trying to, yeah.
I read this book called Why We Sleep, and it
Mm,
has literally changed my life. And moral of the story of the book is sleep is literally the most important thing you need in life. It's more important than water, it's more important than food, it's more important than exercise. And if you do not get sleep, you like it is a huge detriment to your health, your well-being, mental, physical health, everything. And there's been tons of research studies that have proven this. And so for me, I tried out the Whoop strap and I got the Aura ring, and I did the Whoop strap for a year, and then the Aura ring I felt like I was researching and it was a little bit more accurate when it came to sleep at least. And so when I started wearing it, I noticed that I was getting barely any REM at all. And and when I read the book too, I mean, REM is extremely important for recovery. It's also extremely important for memory retention. And my family has a history of Alzheimer's. And so my grandma passed away. And so I was just thinking about that. It's like all these other things, not just for being a top tier athlete. It's like looking for my life down the line too. And so I started to experiment, and I did some obvious things of not looking at a screen before bed, going to bed at the same around the same time every night, not having caffeine later in the day, not exercising later in the day, not having alcohol later in the day. So those were like some pretty obvious things that I was like already doing, and I'm like, okay, so this is obviously isn't helping me. And then I was reading up, and I started to wear. One of the suggestions was wearing an eye mask, and so I'm pretty susceptible to light, and our bedroom is pretty lets in a lot of light. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll wear an eye mask to see if that helps. Because the other thing too is REM happens the last third of your sleep. So if you're waking up earlier, it's cutting into your REM time. And so I wore the eye mask to hopefully sleep another hour and a half longer, which has actually helped me a ton. So I was doing the eye mask, and then um, Nicole Davis, who works for Dr. Gervais, she had suggested to me of taking GABA, which is a neurotransmitter, which helps
mhm.
with anxiety, stress, all that stuff. So I started taking GABA, and then I also started taking magnesium glycinate. There's different types of magnesium. One is more of a laxative, so make sure it's glycinate. And so I started taking that. And then the other thing was I learned that topical magnesium is actually your body absorbs more of it than if you take it orally. So I started, and they said too, like spraying it on your feet allows your body to absorb more. It like gets all through your bloodstream all the way up. So every night, I spray my feet with some magnesium oil, and it was like as soon as I started doing all that, my numbers went through the roof. And I was like, this is crazy. But it's like I feel so much better.
Mm,
It's night, and it's like, the days when you're like, some people can say like, oh, I can sleep 6 hours multiple days in a row and I'll be fine. Like, no, sorry, you're not fine. You think you're fine, but wait till you get 8 hours and you're going to realize just how much better you feel.
mm.
So, and it's just so important. And I can't, you know, I can't hype that up enough.
And do you get a consistent 8 hours every night?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah. Eric hates me for it, but because
And
he'll stay up. He's a night owl, and I'm an early bird. Like I go to bed early, I wake up early, but that's just how I've been my whole life. And if he comes into bed late and then wakes me up, I'm like, oh, you're disrupting my 8 hours.
so something you said there that I think is really relatable to a lot of us, including me, is you said no screen time
Oh
before
yeah,
sleep. Could you
yeah,
talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like a lot of people, including myself, watch movies or on their phone right before sleep. So, like, could you go into a little more details about that? How
yeah.
long should we break before we sleep
Yeah.
from the screens?
They say at least an hour.
An hour.
Um,
Yeah.
so what I like to do is, yeah, of course, like to unwind watching a show or something, and then, but I'll stop a little earlier in the night, and then I'll do my night routine, get ready for bed, brush my teeth, all that stuff, and then I'll try to read for about 30 or 45 minutes, and that's kind of how I unwind every night is by reading. So it's
Cool.
a good way of just entertaining your brain while you're still winding down, while not having to look at a screen. You could also invest in some blue light lenses, which are helpful for if you inevitably have to kind of look at a screen before bed. But ideally, like an hour of no screen time is going to help your sleep more.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I I'm gonna get to social media because I have a whole section on that. But yeah, if I find myself checking social media too much, which it totally happens, I admit it. It's just the scrolling, you know. I can feel myself have a headache, and it's just like it's like too much,
Yeah.
you know. So we'll get to social media, but I want to get to nutrition and hydration.
Okay.
I know you're big on that. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So, nutritional tips, hydration tips, electrolytes. Just share a little bit about how you do it for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I always do extra hydration almost every day. So whether that's, um, I don't really like the liquid IVs because they have a lot of sugar in them,
Hmm.
but like the elements are really good. Um, But anything, because water, sure, you can drink a ton of water, which I still think is great. But if you're exercising a ton and sweating a lot, like you really need to replenish what you've lost. And so, yeah, I always use electrolytes almost every day. My philosophy on nutrition is everything in moderation because I have a really big sweet tooth. So I love, yeah, it's like every night I've got to end something, maybe a little cookie here, a little chocolate there, and so, but it's not like I'm eating the whole box of cookies, right? So, but I kind of have, I make sure to have vegetables and breakfast, lunch, dinner. I always make sure to have a good, healthy, lean protein after a workout or practice. Um, I love fruit. I eat eggs all the time. I love when Eric barbecues because then we just get good meat off the grill. Um, and then obviously do not, like, I think with a lot of girls who have, body image issues or whatever it may be, I think like starving yourself of carbs is not great. Like there's healthy options for carbs of, sweet potatoes or rice or, and I mean, beans and rice, like I could live off of that. I could eat that for every meal. I'd be totally content. So, yeah, I just, I eat what I want, but I eat in moderation. But I also make sure to never feel hungry. Like if I'm every couple hours, I'm like, oh, I could use a snack, and then I'll snack. So
Yeah.
there's no reason to. And I also think too at practices, I want to do a better job of having whether a bar on hand or a banana, something to just continue that energy and that good healthy carb for to sustain and be able to perform for the whole practice.
Yeah. No, that's great. Let's move into workout tips.
Okay.
Any workout tips, or like I've heard you talk a little bit before about training your imbalances, maybe the hamstrings and the posterior chain.
Right.
Talk a little bit about your experience with that.
Yeah, my trainer, he works at a Vibe volleyball lab. It's awesome, and they have a force plate, so they use force plate technology. So every 2 to 3 weeks, I test on the force plate. It does everything from balance to shoulder stability, and then the jump test is it measures your load, explode, and drive, which are all related to different parts of your body. So for me, typically, my drive is always my lowest score, which means that my glute and hamstrings are weaker. And often that can lead to some knee pain. And obviously, being a volleyball player, we tend to be very quad dominant.
Hmm.
So the idea with the structure of our program or the program that he he teaches and that I use is injury prevention. So the reason we test so often is to tell what's happening to my body in real time. Like, okay, great. This week you're actually stronger in your drive, so let's push the load and explode, which is probably a little bit more front loading or hex bar or whatever that may be. So it's cool because we're able to adapt so much week in and week out instead of kind of just doing a program for so long and then who knows, what's happening to your body, or you're having this knee pain and there's no explanation why or you can't figure it out. So it's nice to have that technology and somebody on hand who can see it in real time and help me adjust in real time. But the base of it is obviously, an off season, like I want to build a lot of strength, but always mobility and stability because I think that's super important is to just have balance, especially playing in the sand on uneven surfaces or as you get older. Like I think a lot of older individuals, for example, if they're coming out and playing pickleball, right? You see all these injuries because they've been stagnant sitting on the couch for how many years, and then they rupture their Achilles or they roll their ankle because they don't have that base. So I think it's like for us, it's always continuing to maintain that base and then obviously still build strength when I can.
100%. And talk a little bit about, again, for the younger audience, when's the right time? What age, in your opinion, do you think, kids or younger athletes should start training, like in the weight room or even yoga, flexibility training?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's the right approach there?
I think it's never too early. I
Yeah,
think that obviously, I don't think at younger ages you particularly want to lift too much weight, right? But I think there's a lot of like exercises that you can do, just body weight balance stuff, bands
bands. Yeah,
exercises. But I think it's just so good to have that base because especially these younger kids that are doing so much and pushing themselves so much, and you see all these injuries and there's burnout, and it's just you got to have some balance. And I also think it's important for younger athletes too to play other sports because that's gonna mentally help you, it's gonna physically help you, and it's just gonna make you a little bit more well-rounded and probably um, reduce some injuries and whatnot. But yes, I don't think it's ever too early, and there's definitely ways to adjust around depending on the age.
yeah, no, that's great advice. Speaking of younger athletes, I did put this out on Instagram to see if anyone had a question for you, and I did have a question come through.
Okay.
And this fan question is from Hayden Hillsman, who's actually one of our players at West Coast Beach. Her Instagram is at Hayden_Hillsman. And her question is, what was the motivating factor for switching from indoor to outdoor volleyball? And was the transition easy for you?
Yeah, I think, for me, I always played both indoor and beach volleyball. I was fortunate enough to grow up here in Southern California. And but obviously when I was in high school, there weren't college wasn't a collegiate sport yet. So I was recruited to just play indoor. And after indoor, but while I was playing indoor at USC, granted I loved my experience there. We did well a couple years, but I always knew deep down I liked beach volleyball more. And I think my big decision or my the reasoning behind that is that one, you're at the beach or you're outside,
Right.
which I think is awesome and
Yeah.
healthy. Two, I loved that I got to do all of the skills. I got to pass, I got to hit, I get to set, all of it instead of being position specific. So I just like the aspect of it making you a well-rounded athlete, being able to do every part of the sport. Um, but yeah, I think overall, I just have always loved it more and knew deep down that I was gonna make that switch as soon as the opportunity presented itself.
And what was that transition like for you? And what advice do you give to others that are thinking about making that switch?
Yeah, I think for the transition for me, it was good. I mean, uh, obviously I had that base of playing for a long time. But I think the biggest piece of advice would be to just play as much as you can because experience goes a long way in beach volleyball.
Yeah,
And I think that the more people you play with, the more reps you're getting, the more elements you're dealing with, wind, all of that is just going to make you better overall. So yeah, so I say just get out there and play as much as you can and have fun with it too.
yeah, that's great advice. Let's shift gears a little bit here. I want to ask you about podcasting.
Okay.
Because for me, this has kind of changed my life. It's
Hmm.
really opened me up. It's expanded my mindset, my thinking, my relationships, my networking. I want to ask you about it. What have you learned in your podcasting journey with the Bet on Her podcast?
Yeah, it's been so awesome, and I feel similarly that it's definitely I feel like my growth mindset with it all is amazing, and the connections that you make with people. For me, it's like having a really deep and meaningful conversation is so rewarding.
Hmm.
Like every time we film a podcast, afterwards we just got these huge smiles on our faces. Like, wow, that was so awesome. Like, and I don't know, I just think that the community that it generates around it too, especially with Bet on Her is pretty special. So I love what we're doing and I love that podcasts are a way of connecting people that maybe would have otherwise not connected in a unique,
Totally.
special way. So yeah, I feel very similarly.
And I feel like we're in this age of podcasting now where there's more and more podcasts, which I think is actually a good thing because I feel like we're in the age of the share, right?
Hmm.
There's all this information, including everything that you just shared right now. that it's just this age of sharing, and it's so cool, and you can like pick up on what resonates with you, and so it I think it's going to get more and more specialized. Do you have a vision of what do you think the future looks like for podcasting?
Yeah, I think the specialized would be pretty cool. I mean, I love all of the new study podcasts like the Huberman Lab
Yeah.
and like learning all of that stuff. Like I feel like it's so informative and educational that I think is, just trying to help people live healthier, better, more meaningful lives and all that. So yeah, be cool
Yeah,
to
awesome. And I'm gonna make sure I link the Bet on Her podcast. I'm gonna share it with our club, because I
awesome.
love what you guys are doing. I think it's really, really cool.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Let's briefly touch on social media.
Yeah.
And here's how I want to talk about it. It's becoming a thing where it's like you got to have a healthy relationship with it.
Hmm.
If you don't, it can be overwhelming. And I see it as it can create this FOPO. You mentioned Dr. Gervais, Dr. Michael Gervais. He brought this idea of fear of people's opinions as a very prominent, prevalent thing right now in society, but it's being driven, in my opinion, by social media. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with social media and how you create a healthy relationship with it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that was a great book. That definitely resonated with me. I think there have been times where it's the comparison thing has been tough for me with social media of looking at other people's accounts or what they're posting and comparing it to myself, being like, oh gosh, she has so much more followers than me. Oh, her engagement's so much better. Like these things that are so meaningless, really. Obviously, I know social media now is such a necessary evil, um, but it's like how you can utilize it for for me with my manager. She's helped teach me how to manage my own brand, how to market myself in a healthy way. And granted, I have these amazing sponsors who I've worked with for a handful of years, and yes, of course I have social media obligations to them, but the biggest thing for me is never working with somebody that I don't share the same values with, because at the end of the day, I'm going to post what I want to post on social media, and I'm not going to tailor it to anybody. And so I want to be true to myself. I want these, sure, maybe I don't have a ton of followers, but like the quality of followers that I have, I think is important. So the biggest lesson I've learned is like, it's just post what you want to post. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to post something because it's going to gain me followers or gain me likes. Like I'm going to post it because I really like it and I want to share it. And if people don't like it, I just don't care anymore. I just don't overthink it, right? I'm like, I'm not going to overthink this caption. I'm not going to overthink this photo. I like it. I'm going to do it.
Yeah,
And then
that's cool.
I
Yeah.
just leave it.
No, that's good. That's simple. I like that a lot. You mentioned marketing. Could you touch on marketing and branding? I know
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
really yeah, I know you're good at it. I mean, talk about like
Well, thank you.
specifically for the younger athlete. How does someone like get into the idea of marketing and branding?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot to it. I have a digital marketing background, so I do that on the side as well. So that's helped me. But with marketing yourself, I think it's just always being authentic and genuine. Because if you're not authentically yourself, I think people will catch on to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so I think it's just like going back to the true self, right? Like staying within that, and like I said, working with brands, or if you're looking for sponsors or looking for NIL deals, whatever that is finding brands that share the same values that you truly believe in, that you love to share with your followers and your friends and family because you truly believe in it. I think that is like so much better than just taking a deal just for the sake of money or just reaching out to someone because, you know, you want to get a paycheck at the end of the day, right? So
Really well said. Yes. That's great. And that gives me a chance to give you a chance to talk about your sponsors. I know you have quite a few. Talk about your sponsors, talk about how that has helped you as with your athletic journey.
yeah, I mean, I would not have been able to have the career that I've had without my sponsors, and they've supported me through years and years. My two main sponsors are Sharp Vision, Modern LASIK. So I got LASIK from them, and I have 2015 vision now, which is amazing. And I love them. And they're an amazing partner to work with because, um, they're not just trying to help, they're trying to help more athletes too, because they know what a difference it makes in your sport to have good vision and not have to worry about contacts or glasses. And then similarly, I also work with Blenders Eyewear, so get to rock their shades, and they're such an amazing company to work with. Um, and I mean, they have so many cool styles and trends. So I mean, I literally wear it's like that's my job, is wearing sunglasses. So
That's pretty cool. I
yeah.
remember when I saw you on that billboard
Oh yeah.
in Santa Monica. I was like, oh, that's Geena Urango. Look at that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Um, Last couple things. Any advice you have for other athletes? I heard you say that you are more than your sport on another
Yeah.
podcast, and I absolutely love that. Could you just break that down a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's definitely a piece of advice I like to share with people. Like going back to what I said earlier, there's a lot more to life than your sport. It's I did this exercise where I wrote down all these things that I am. Um, like I'm a dog mom, I'm a girlfriend, I'm a daughter, I'm hardworking, I'm motivated, I'm empathetic, all these characteristics. And you realize you're like, wow, this is so cool. And I think it's tough because yeah, like these younger athletes get so tied into being this amazing athlete, which I think is great to strive for. But I also think that there's a lot of other things that you can strive to be that can help not just your volleyball, but your life in general. So compassion, empathy, I think those are two big things that I really try to embody day in and day out.
I love the I am. That's like an affirmation. Have you heard of ask formations?
Oh, no, I haven't.
So the idea behind that is like, why am I so empathetic? How am I such a good athlete? When you ask yourself those questions, your subconscious immediately answers them. So you
Hmm.
get a question and an answer, and it's pretty cool. Someone told me that, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll have to do that exercise.
yeah, you just ask yourself whatever you think you are, and you
Yeah.
say, why am I that, or how am I that way? It's a cool exercise. Geena, last thing I want to ask you about is legacy and fulfillment. What legacy do you want to leave, and what makes you fulfilled?
Yeah. That's a very good loaded question. I think for legacy, I really just want to leave behind someone like a not just an athlete, but somebody that younger girls can look up to. Um, I feel like I've kind of taken on a little bit of this mentorship role with some of these younger athletes coming out onto the tour, and that's going into fulfillment also. Like that has truly fulfilled me to be able to give back in that way. So I think I just want to create this legacy of bringing together a community where yes, we're competitors, sure, off the court, but like I'm here for you, and I want them to know later down the road they could do that for somebody also. So I just want all these athletes to know, and any of your listeners too, like feel free to message me, ask me for advice, whatever it may be, because you know I had to figure it out on my own too, and so however I can help, I would love to, and that truly leaves me fulfilled in this sport, especially.
Wow, that's awesome. I appreciate that so much. And Geena, what a cool conversation we had. Thank you so much for being a part of this show and just sharing knowledge. It was
Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah, thank you. Those were awesome questions.
Yeah, awesome. Before we end, just tell people how they can best support you and follow you.
Yeah, I mean, you can follow me at Urango. It's Durango without the D. And yeah, just any messages you have too. Like I'm always pretty good at responding.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Geena. And for all the listeners and viewers of the show, we appreciate you. Stay inspired, everybody. Peace and blessings.
Thank you.